What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Fall of X, and we are covering Uncanny Spider-Man, when Nightcrawler becomes Spider-Man in Marvel Comics, and it's really, really amazing. Okay, so this basically opens up with a couple of guys who are effectively snatching up organs, right? Literally the black market organ trade, and just trying to escape. Now, one of the cool things they do here, and I feel like this is built off of Spider-Man Homecoming, right? The movie, where they come to this realization that when it comes to like any of the Spider-Man that they're referencing, right? So really like Miles Morales or Peter Parker, being in the city is what makes villains easy to catch because they can just swing from one building to the next. So instead, they race through Central Park. And they kind of have this statement where they say like, how come nobody ever thought about this before? Which under normal circumstances would be the right thing to do, except they didn't bank on Nightcrawler, who shows up dressed as Spider-Man, and it looks amazing. Like, I want to know your all thoughts. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think about Nightcrawler as Spider-Man. Like, how do you feel about how he looks? Because he looks dope. Now, of course, Nightcrawler is able to get the upper hand quite readily. And in reality, if we're being honest, I feel like Nightcrawler would make a more effective version of Spider-Man because unlike Peter Parker, who just swings, Nightcrawler can teleport and he can also climb and all that kind of stuff, right? There are some things that Spider-Man can do, like he's way stronger than Nightcrawler is, but ultimately Nightcrawler gets the upper hand on these guys. Now, one of the things that takes place in this fight between the two of them, or really between Nightcrawler and these guys, is Nightcrawler dons this kind of like astral sword. And these guys don't really know what to make of it. That what one of these guys have been doing is actually focusing on something called Spider Stands, which is effectively a forum for like people who are on the lookout for Spider-Man or who are fans for Spider-Man, but it's a really good place for like criminals to canvas to learn what Spider-Man's doing and if there's like any new abilities or anything along those lines. Everybody has heard of this new version of Spider-Man, right? Nightcrawler as Spider-Man, but nobody really knows a whole lot about him. And there was certainly no word about him having just this crazy sword. We will talk about that here in a minute, but one of the things that goes on is that he's actually met by these guys who kind of walk up on him after he defeats these villains. And one of the guys, which is kind of hilarious, is like, hey man, like we've heard about you, we're big fans. Would you mind signing a $20 bill for me? I'll take a couple of 10s if you've got it. Which is actually a pretty smart way to try to get money out of somebody, to be honest with you. But then there's this chick that shows up out of nowhere and asks like where her baby is. Now, she will be important here in a little while. And in fact, it's gonna blow your mind once we actually get to what's really going on with her character, because it's amazing. But before anything can happen, one of the Sentinels show up. Now, the crazy thing about this is, remember, during Fall of X and the fact that mutants are not supposed to be on Earth, when Tony Stark's company was taken over, which of course, you'll find a playlist for Fall of X at the end of this video, that the Sentinels were basically restructured and recreated using Stark tech, which makes them more powerful and capable than they normally are. But of course, like traditional Sentinels, they have the ability to detect a mutant presence, and they detect Nightcrawler. Now, one of the homeless guys kind of starts yelling at the Sentinels and saying, hey man, like we're all just normal people here. It's cool, relax. And the Sentinel in turn actually scans the group for DNA evidence of there being any basically mutant here whatsoever. And then a kind of disembodied voice comes out of nowhere and tells Nightcrawler to relax. We'll talk about that here in a second, because there's going to be this sort of tell-all that happens to kind of explain what in the world is going on here. Because admittedly, we're just kind of thrown in the middle of everything. And so once this happens, Nightcrawler grabs the human organs, teleports away, of course, taking him to a hospital. And then we pick up with a conversation between himself and Spider-Man. Now, here's the thing. When Peter Parker arrives here and starts talking to Nightcrawler, it's made pretty clear in no uncertain terms that Peter doesn't really have a problem with Nightcrawler basically pretending to be like another version of Spider-Man in New York, but it's not as though Nightcrawler is taking over the role of Spider-Man. More so than this, he even asked the question like, how long is this going to go on for? So one of the things to understand about this and why Nightcrawler's even acting as Spider-Man in the first place really comes out of the prelude to Fall of X, which was Sons of X. That largely dealt with basically Marvel writing Legion out because Legion's just an astronomically powerful character. The guy could snap his fingers and end the entire Fall of X event. So in order to actually be able to tell the event, Marvel wrote his character out. For Nightcrawler, he actually had this crazy thing that went on with him. So what ended up happening is Nightcrawler was basically taken and corrupted, and then in an effort to discredit the mutant population, was sent in under this corruption and assassinated like 3 different public officials, right, in a very, very public way, so that it could go towards this idea of Orchis putting out this propaganda campaign. Mutants are inherently bad, they work against us, all that kind of stuff. It was because of that when Fall of X first kicked off and Orchis made this claim that the mutant flowers and medicines and so on that were designed to basically help humanity were kind of a backdoor way for mutants to kill humanity, why it was so credible. Because there had been like these kind of schemes that Orchis had been doing to discredit the mutant population. One of the other things that had gone on here, and with regards to the nature of Nightcrawler's sword, that Mother Righteous had basically weaponized his hope, which is to say, like, as most people know when it comes to Nightcrawler, he's almost like this incorruptible guy when it comes to how much he hopes. It's all based on his faith, and his faith is a very, very core part of his character. But taking that ideology and turning it into a physical weapon, that's why he has the sword that he has now. In terms of the disembodied voice, that's still a little bit murky. The only thing we really seem to have here is kind of a conversation that took place between Nightcrawler and I'm pretty sure it was Banshee, where the question was asked, did like Legion leave you anything, right? Kind of like a parting gift before he took off. And basically Nightcrawler saw this kind of like white gremlin that was just kind of lingering around him, and like that was it. Presumably, that's what's going on here. It's a little portion of Legion that he left behind with Nightcrawler, and that's what blocked the Sentinel from being able to detect his mutant gene. Either that, or it was a kind of a parting gift in the sense that that's also his hope manifested in a physical form, and it's kind of like unlimited power, right? Because hope is limitless, like that kind of thing. As much metaphorical as it is anything else. But again, it's not overly obvious here, and it's very, very murky in terms of how it works. But the crazy thing about this is that this is really just kind of Nightcrawler laying low. It's him just kind of figuring out what it is that he's going to do. And the reason for that is because after the forced assassinations and all that kind of stuff leading up to Fall of X, before all these mutants were attacked and forced to leave and so on, Nightcrawler had willingly left the X-Men. So he was not there when the Fall of X event kicked off and the mutants on Krakoa were attacked. So if you were wondering where he was, that's why he wasn't present. And so here, him being in this place is him just kind of figuring out where his life goes from here, what life looks like for himself, doing what he can to try to help mutants from the shadows, but not being overly obvious about it. And so from there, we switch from Kurt Wagner, right, from Nightcrawler to Orchis headquarters itself. And this is amazing because this brings back like Days of Future Past and Age of Apocalypse in one of the coolest ways, right? Great callbacks to these stories. So one of the things that Orchis realizes is that one of the Sentinels that was out there on Gene Patrol had initially detected him, and where the image was sent back to Orchis, they recognized that it's Nightcrawler, but the Sentinel didn't know it was him and basically left. Now, again, we know it's just because of the manipulation by that gremlin, presumably his hope, whatever, but Orchis doesn't quite understand what's going on. But what they have been tipped off to is that mutants are finding a way to shield their mutant gene from Orchis. Now, if you remember the Iron Man video that we did, where we talked about that, where basically Emma Frost, right, one of the most powerful telepaths in existence, wearing a ring that was presumably created by Tony Stark to hide her mutant gene. If Orchis ever became aware of the fact that mutants were doing this, it would change everything, because then they would develop a way to overcome that. Now, how you overcome the power of hope or like magic or something like that, Orchis couldn't necessarily do. Overcoming technology is incredibly easy to do. But what they're also doing is they have Feral here. Now, Feral is a member of the mutant community, but what they're doing is they're actually weaponizing Feral. They're weaponizing this girl. And the reason why is because, as most of you guys who have read like Days of Future Past or Age of Apocalypse or anything like that have probably figured out by now, they're revamping the Hound program. They're introducing the Hound program. For those of you guys who don't know what that is, and funny enough, Adrian Toombs, Vulture, is actually working alongside Orchis, which is kind of nuts. The Hound program was introduced as part of Days of Future Past and as part of Age of Apocalypse, but it gained its highest level of popularity in Age of Apocalypse. It's basically mutants that are being forced to track down other mutants. Either it's mutants that have enhanced sense of smell or whatever the case is, or like telepaths, right? Rachel Summers was a good example of that. She was a wildly powerful telepath who could track down other mutants, specifically other telepaths that could shield their existence from like the forces of Apocalypse or the forces of the Sentinels or anything along those lines. This is a way for Orchis to hunt down mutants who are clearly staying hidden on Earth. It's a really, really cool concept. I love that they're doing this. And so what they do is they say, okay, the Hound program in the here and now is not necessarily ready. We're gonna have to go with another group that's capable of hunting and tracking down mutants. Now, before we find out what's going on with that, we actually transition to the woman who's always crying about her baby, right? Sad Susie. And what ends up going on here is that Nightcrawler in Central Park, which is where he largely just resides, ends up witnessing a woman who's being held or really kind of being mugged by a guy, right? Or at least he's attempting to. Of course, Nightcrawler shows up in time. He basically deals with this guy. That's effectively it, right? Takes this guy out, knocks him out, and then that's really all there is to it. The woman is actually wearing a device around her neck that's been sold by Orchis, right? It's being sold to the general public by Orchis that detects mutants, that tells really anybody wearing it if there is a mutant in proximity, right? It's one of these things where, again, it feeds very much into like Operation, or at least Project Wide Awake, right? If you see something, say something, turning the general public into an early alarm system for Orchis themselves, right? Taking public sentiment, turning it towards mutant population, and then saying, they're the bad guys. They are all our enemy, and humanity functioning accordingly. It's a cool thing, because what ends up going on here is that when this guy basically seems to get knocked out, he sits up and then he turns into Mystique. It turns out Mystique is the woman because she keeps saying, "Where's my baby?" Now, the reason why this is so mind-blowing is because when Fall of X kicked off, Mystique was killed. She's supposed to be dead. So we have no idea what's going on with her. How is Mystique alive? She doesn't really even seem to know who she is. Now, what's really cool about this is that as we get to the end of this, we pick up with a group of mercenaries who are being tasked with tracking Nightcrawler. Come to find out, this is Wild Pack. Now, let me tell you something. Wild Pack is easy to dismiss. The forces of Silver Sable, whatever, they're easy to throw away. No, man. Like, Wild Pack, with the resources of Orchis at their disposal, these guys are bounty hunters. And I will say this, as much as Silver Sable sucks because she's not really interesting, she never has been, she probably never will be, Wild Pack is very cool. And whenever they set their sights on tracking somebody, Wolverine, Professor Xavier, Magneto, it doesn't matter. They always get their target. Every time, without fail. So I'm excited to see where this goes. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. If you need to get caught up on Fall of X, make sure you click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.